Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for coming to our second edition of Free Training Friday for OfficeTools. My name is Kaylee White. I am a marketing coordinator here at Abacus Next. I'm based in San Diego, and for all of you who are not yet aware, Abacus Next is the parent company of OfficeTools, and so we're starting to bring you these weekly free training seminars. And today we have with us Philip Ferris. He is the Director of Education at OfficeTools, and this will run for about 30 minutes today. We'll take your Q&A at the end, and don't worry, we will send you a recording of this webinar in case you can't watch the whole thing or you'd like to review it later. So on that note, please take it away, Phil.
Great. Thank you, Kaylee, and thank you everybody so much for taking some time out of your day to join us. As Kaylee mentioned, this is actually part 2 of the Essential Training for New Users webinar. So part 1 is available if you go to abacusnext.com. You can find it there and look for it in the future along with the other webinars. But this is part 2. So not to go back too far, but in part 1 what we talked about was general layout of the application, some of the key functions like the Calls tab, the calendar, contact management, things of that sort. And what we're going to talk about today is what we where we left off, which is really with time, billing, and document management. So those are going to be some of the key areas that we're really going to be discussing today. And I want to, before I really jump into it, I want to make sure that my audio is coming in well. So if somebody wouldn't mind, and I really only need one answer, but everybody can jump in, if you could type into the chat area that my audio is coming in okay, I would be more than happy to go ahead and start moving forward here. Just want to make sure everybody can hear me. Perfect. I already got some hands up in some replies.
Feel free to raise a hand too. That's really helpful. If you see the little hand button in the panel.
Looks good. All right, guys. Thank you so much for the input. And on that note, I am going to leave some time at the end to answer any questions anybody has. It can be about today's topic or just in general. If you have any questions about Office Tools, this is a really good time to ask those. If for some reason I'm not able to get to those during the webinar, I will follow up after the webinar with some answers to your questions. So that being said, again, what I'm going to talk about is some kind of general layout navigation when it comes to billing and document management, but then we're really going to jump right into the billing and invoicing side. If you're not tracking time, that's okay. I'm still going to talk about invoices from a flat fee perspective. And we're going to go over some of those things like invoice types. And then we're obviously going to talk a little bit about document management. And a lot of things with document management especially aren't very obvious in the application. And what I mean by that is, Office Tools is very good at showing you, all the information you need in one area, but there's a lot of additional function just behind the scenes when it comes to document management that a lot of people aren't aware of. So I'm going to talk about those things today also. So to kind of get started here, with the layout of Office Tools, if you're a brand new user and this is the very first time you're hearing or seeing of this, it's really broken up into 3 different areas. Over on the far left, we have our contact list. That's where we start. Across the top of the screen, we have 9 different tabs, 7 of which we talked about in part 1, so you're going to want to go back and look at that at abacusnext.com. And on the very bottom, we have an activity list, which is where all of our tasks get tracked and kind of signed up. So today, again, we're going to focus on the time and billing aspects and document management. But the reason I wanted to kind of start with the main page here is really because what's going down here on the bottom with the activity list. Office Tools is very good about, like I just mentioned a moment ago, presenting you with information. But it also is very good about presenting you with the next item that you might have to do, whether it's a task or a project, whatever you may be working on. When you're done with those items, however, an opportunity to track time comes up and it's very important. So to give you an example of that, I can take a task that I have down here on the bottom, I can simply check it off of my list, and a time card is going to pop up. Now, what I want to talk about here from a new user perspective is kind of clarify what's happening here when I track my time. And one of the key components of that is work codes. So work codes in Office Tools are going to do a couple things for you. Most obviously, they give you a description of how you want to track your time. Now, obviously, we're not going to go into the setup of these, but I want to discuss them so that everyone's clear about how they work and why they're so important. So for myself, for example, as I completed my task, I get my time card, I would go ahead and choose the appropriate code, put in the amount of time that I tracked, say OK, and that would go ahead and show up on my timesheet. which then serves a dual purpose, right? My timesheet could be something used internally for, for payroll and administrative time, things of that sort. But obviously, this particular code, in this case, individual prep, is actually been set up to be billable. I don't have to make that determination. That's been determined in the setup of the program. So when I track this time, it's going to go ahead and pop up in the billing for that client and potentially get billed later on. So what's important to realize about these codes is that you can default what codes show up in what areas of the program. And this is very, very handy, especially if you're new at OfficeTools. What we want to see is that when the need to track time arises, that we don't have to stop and spend minutes and minutes filling out a form. We want it to be as quick and concise as possible. So all I have to do in this example is make sure my work code's correct, or change it if I need to, and put in the quantity of time. Everything else should already be filled out for me. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. It's going to go ahead and again show up on my timesheet. This being a project, I can go ahead and reassign the next step. We won't worry about that too much. But then I'm done. That's all I have to do. My time is now tracked, it's associated to the project, and I've reassigned it. But the code populated itself. So there's something I want everybody to look at if you're new to OfficeTools, or you know what, if you're an experienced user and you weren't aware of this, this is very helpful also. Navigate up to the setup menu at the top of the screen, and I want you to come down to the section that says My Settings. Now in here there's a lot of options, but where I want to pull your attention to is over on the right-hand side under Default Values. What you're able to do here is actually choose the specific code for these selected areas that you want as the default. So for example, let's say you spend most of your time doing admin no charge. You know, most of your day is just kind of making sure the office is running and everything's getting done, but you're not necessarily tracking a lot of billable time, or you're not doing a lot of that type of work. So, you know, perhaps in your default here, you would actually choose a code that represents most of your day as your main default work code. Okay, for to-dos and for phone calls and for appointments, you can also specify a unique code to those. So that's what I have here. For my work code, because I do, you know, individual tax prep more often than anything else, that's my default. But my to-do codes are typically going to be things that are non-chargeable. It's the admin work. So I went ahead and defaulted admin no charge for that. Likewise, I have it set up for my phone call chargeable and my client meeting codes. So these defaults will do a lot when it comes to filling out a time card, but they will also help when it comes to running timers. So throughout the program, you have opportunity to track time using timers also, and you can do that in two different ways. The first way is to find an item on your activity list and simply right-click on it and choose Timer. Alternatively, on any tab that you may be on throughout the program, from Contacts over to Documents, you'll also see this little timer button here on the screen. So typically, if you do not have a default code selected, when you hit the timer, it's going to pop up and ask you what work code do you want to use. To avoid that, because the system does have my defaults, I can actually click the timer button and immediately it pops up and starts running, which is going to save me a couple mouse clicks and also improve the accuracy of the time that I'm tracking. Now I can change the codes obviously, but again, it's going to save me a little bit of time. So that's just this little thing I wanted to put in there that's important for people to understand if they're new to OfficeTools, that those default values can save you a lot of time and again improve accuracy and time tracking. Nobody enjoys tracking time, so if we can make it a little bit easier, then we'll be better for it. So where does that take us? Well, we're tracking time, and if we're billing that time, then all that's going to navigate over to the billing tab here. So I know not everybody on the line here is a biller, but I want to be clear about how the process works, because I think it's very important in any kind of workflow system to understand what happened before you got involved and what happens after you've been involved. And I think billing is that after point. We're tracking things in OfficeTools, we're doing things, we're updating information, and if we are tracking time, and even if we're not tracking time, ultimately there's a billing part that happens afterwards. So I want to kind of paint a picture of how billing works in OfficeTools. That way, if you're not involved in it directly, at least you understand the process, and I think that may help everything kind of work a little more fluid. So when I come over to the billing tab, it's actually broken into 3 subsections. We can see time, invoices, and payments. So I'm on ABC Company as my client. I'm under the time section of billing, and so what I'm looking at is all that billable time that I've been tracking for the client, or that anybody in the office has been tracking for that client. And I'm not going to go into all the complex variations of billing, but just so you're aware, OfficeTools can support really just about any style of billing that you're looking for. All right. If you want to run WIP reports, and have a meeting about the paper as it works around the room, and people are scribbling on it and then somebody updates it, that's great. If you want to do it on screen in the program, that's okay too. But really what comes down to is I can come to my time screen here and I can select the time that I want to bill. I can see the amounts of the selected time, and if I want to go ahead and create an invoice for that, I can hit Invoice Now. If you are a biller and you're using OfficeTools for that, here's something that can be kind of helpful. If you use the mouse and you actually drag over all the time cards, you can see the amount start to adjust itself as I do that. So for example, let's say I bill the client $1,000 a month. So I want to come in here, I want to see how much time we've tracked, and I want to try to get the total amount up to that. That way, you know, we're on track. So there we go. I can go ahead and now actually right-click on this and invoice it. And it will take all those time cards and create an invoice for that amount, which then I could adjust to $1,000. But what I'm going to do in this example, I'm just going to grab a couple here on the top by checking them off, and I'm going to hit Invoice Now. Now, in the billable time area, there's also a select time, which allows you to filter and sort it and make a little bit more sense of what you're looking at, which can be very, very helpful. But I've selected my time. I'm going to go ahead and Invoice Now. And then it's going to ask me for an invoice date, which may or may not be today. That's something that you will decide, or the biller will decide when they're creating the invoice. And then a status. And here's something that's important to realize. In OfficeTools, invoices really come down to 3 different statuses. In process, which means there's probably time still being added. We're still updating descriptions. We may not know the exact amount we're going to bill just yet, but we wanted an invoice to be created and have something to work with. We have review, which is more of just a status for everybody's acknowledgement that, look, we've probably already made all our decisions, but it needs that final approval from you know, a partner or a manager or whomever it may be. But ultimately, when all that's done, we want to make sure we put our invoices in final status. And there's a lot of reasons why that's important with reporting and relieving of WIP, but ultimately what in this conversation why it's important is because we cannot apply a payment to an invoice unless that invoice is marked final. So I want to be clear on that. So in this example, I'm just going to go ahead and put it in review, and I'm going to say Invoice Now. The system's going to crank away for a moment. It's going to navigate me over to the Invoices section, and I'll pull this out of the screen for just a moment. So we're now automatically in the Invoices area for that client, which we can see all their invoices in the background, but it actually brings up to the forefront the edit screen for the invoice itself. Now there's a couple different styles of invoices. Okay, there's summary, we have department and group and project and so on and so forth, and every office is going to have a different style of invoice that they're going to want to use most of the time. But the most common, the most popular ones typically are going to be the summary invoice, which is what you're seeing here, and what that represents is a single line item and a total. Regardless of how many time cards or different work codes or whatever, it's basically saying we did some work and you owe us money for it. And it's the simplest, kind of straightforward version of an invoice. But if you would like to have more detail, it's really as simple as choosing a different type. The next common invoice type is actually probably going to be work code and or project style, depending on where you're tracking your time. Are you tracking it against projects? If so, it's probably going to be a project style. If you're not using projects for that purpose, then maybe work code may be the best bet. And all it really does is begin to group your line items by the same code. And at this point, we can come in and start making adjustments to descriptions and amounts. Okay, so the time that I tracked came out to $402. I'm going to go ahead and actually bill this client $500. So I put $500 in there. I now have the opportunity to apportion my time. So again, without going too far into the weeds here, this is basically saying, look, I'm going to invoice for $500. My time is only $400, so it's going to adjust it automatically for me. So I'm going to go ahead and say yes to that, and I'm done. I can then take this invoice, and using the tools at the top, I can email it to the client, I can print it out and send it that way, or I can upload it to the OfficeTools client portal. And I'll bring that up as a preview just real quick to show everybody. Now, any of the styles can work. You can go back to a pre-existing invoice. If you'd like to reprint it under a different style, you can go ahead and do that. But here's my invoice. Looks great. I'm happy with it. I'm going to go ahead and change the status to final. All right, and move on. Done deal. That time that I clicked off a moment ago is no longer under the time tab. The invoice has now been created and it's in the system here. So I send that out to the client and hopefully I get paid. So the third section is really just that. It's the area for payments. Anybody who's entered in a payment into QuickBooks or a like system, this will seem very, very familiar to you. You simply come to the, you receive your payment, cash, check, whatever it may be, come to the plus button here on the toolbar and you can create a new payment. You find the invoice that you marked final, all right, enter in the payment amount and details and apply it and you're done. Now, I know that's a very, very simple overview of how billing works, but I think that touches all the finer points of you can track your time, you can then invoice that time, and you can take a payment and apply to it. Here's the really cool part about OfficeTools when it comes to billing, is you don't have to do it in that order. What I mean by that is you can receive a payment before you ever create an invoice. It'll track in the system as a retainer. You can create an invoice before you've ever done any work, and then add that time into that invoice at a later point. And that's actually very simple to do. You just navigate to the invoice that you want. There's a little clock with a piece of paper right up here on the top, and you simply add that time, that unbilled time, back into that invoice. So that's kind of, again, the quickest version of billing, at least billing time. If you're not tracking time, you're not concerned with that aspect of it, then you know what? You can skip all that time stuff. We just want to create a bill. You simply come to the invoices section and hit the plus sign. Create an invoice. Now, the obvious thing here to consider is because there is no time cards associated to it, there's no detail. We have to add all the detail ourselves. But that's okay. We can summarize it and put a total. We can use the custom style, which is at the very bottom here, and build out our own line items if we'd like, which is great. And if you need to in the future, you can go ahead and select the little clock at the top, like I said, and add time cards back into it. So you got a lot of flexibility. There's a lot of tools available. And obviously, every office does billing a little bit differently, but I wanted to give everybody the overview of just how billing works in a nutshell inside of OfficeTools. Okay, so now I'm going to transition over to document management, and there's a lot to cover here, so this is going to be really, really quick, but I want to touch on these points because I think they're very, very important. There's a lot of ways to get documents into OfficeTools. First thing you have to understand is OfficeTools is storing those documents on your server, okay, or in whatever place has been decided that they get stored. Getting them into OfficeTools is really as simple as just dragging them from wherever they are into the program. So I have a document on my desktop, I can click on it, drag it into the Documents tab, and release. It then gives me a screen where I can choose the category and the year, project if it's associated to it, add notes, all kinds of great stuff. When I do that, it's going to go ahead and remove it from the desktop and add it into OfficeTools under that client. Very simple, very easy, very straightforward. But there are other ways, and this is really what I'm going to talk about during the last couple of minutes we have before we go into Q&A, the other ways that you can have documents added into OfficeTools. The first way is to actually install the add-ins. So, and this is per computer, by the way. This is not a global thing. This has to be done for each workstation. But what you can do is if you navigate to the Documents tab, you can actually come up to this Install button on the toolbar, and right in here there's an option for Adobe Acrobat, PDF print drivers, and Microsoft Office. Each one of these is obviously a very specific thing, but what it allows you to do is with the Adobe Acrobat and Microsoft Office products, you can have a add-in embedded into those applications, so you can be working, for example, inside of Excel, simply click a button and that document will then come into OfficeTools. Very cool, very streamlined. It makes it so you don't have to leave the application you're in to store a document inside of OfficeTools securely. The PDF print driver obviously is just that. If you're in a certain program, your tax software, for example, and you wanted to save a client copy of a tax return, great, you simply print it to OfficeTools. And it'll go through the same process. It'll ask you, okay, well, what's the year? Does this go to a project? And you can make that association very quick, and it will add it directly into OfficeTools. So that's a very, very cool thing there also. The last one I want to talk about, which is probably the least known way of getting documents into OfficeTools, is using Drop Folder. So the setup is very, very easy. Under the Setup menu here at the top of the screen, there's a section for Documents, and there's a category here for Drop Folder. And what you're doing here is you're going to point OfficeTools to any folder on your system that you want to use as a repository for documents. Think of a scan folder is probably the best analogy or example I could give. So any document placed into this folder will then be queued and prompted to be added into OfficeTools. And this is great, as I mentioned, for scanners and those types of things. So I can take a document, simply drag it into this folder. I might not even have OfficeTools open, and it'll prompt me to add that document. Very quick, very convenient, and a very simple way of doing it. The last thing that I want to mention about documents is they don't always have to be documents. Again, this is another thing that people aren't always aware of. You can add any kind of file or link to a file inside of here. So for example, let's say that you have a folder of documents that you don't want those individual documents themselves inside of OfficeTools for one reason or another, but you want to get to them very quickly. You can actually create a shortcut to a folder. You can create a shortcut to a program and add that in here. So when you click on it, it opens it up for you directly. Very cool, very easy way of doing it. Okay, so that's kind of, again, billing and document management for people who may not have seen it yet, who are new to OfficeTools, or maybe they haven't started using the billing components, or they haven't started using the document management area. I left a lot on the table, however, because there is quite a bit of setup and discussion that needs to be had between the users and the OfficeTools trainers, the consultants, to make sure that the way that you're wanting to do billing, the way that you're setting up your invoices and setting up your codes, for example, are what's going to work best for you. And likewise with documents, especially because we're dealing with client documents in most cases, we want to make sure that the system is set up correctly to help facilitate that. So at this point, what I'm going to do to make sure if there's any questions kind of out there, I want to give everybody some time to start going to the questions area and asking any questions you have about OfficeTools in general or about billing or documents as we've kind of discussed today. And I'm going to go ahead and look over those questions. So right now is a really good time for anybody to jump in there, and I'll do my best to answer every question. If I can't, again, like I said, I'll follow up and give you a more detailed reply afterwards. Okay, so there's a question here about running one report between the date range that will show all jobs that are incomplete. Now, I imagine jobs are going to be projects, and I may or may not be right about that, but here's a report that I think might help. Now, there's a lot of reports that show the status of work, and we do differentiate between projects and what I'm going to go ahead and call task, and that's going to be a phone call, a to-do, an appointment, things of that sort. But here's one report. If you're just trying to look at the status of kind of what's out there for everything, it's actually a staff activity report. So what's cool about this is if you go to the report section under staff, I'll pull this up real quick, hopefully this doesn't take too long. There's an area here called staff activity, and what this will do is really show you everything that's out there. And over on the right, there's an option to include completed events. So the whole idea of this report, and you can, again, there's a lot of filters, and we don't have time to go through all of those, but tinker around, and this report will really tell you everything that's kind of going on, maybe even more things that you want. However, if you're looking specifically for projects, what you're probably going to want to look for is the project log or current status reports. So give those ones a shot, see if they're what you're looking for. If not, let us know, and obviously we'll be more than happy to dive a little deeper. Okay, so let me see here. A lot of great questions. How do you print an unbilled sweep of all clients? It sounds like a WIP report. Again, that's going to be in the reports area. So we have a very specific report for that called the WIP report. Again, a lot of filters, a lot of sorts and options, but if you go to the billing reports, there's a WIP report right here, and this will show you just that. It'll show, and you can print this out obviously, all clients, all staff, all unbilled time, and you can use the date range here at the top to block that off to certain periods as you see fit. Okay, so somebody asked here, John Smith asked, in reference to the very first webinar talking about contacts. So I'm going to touch on this real quick. So on the contacts tab, I'm sorry, on the contacts list over here on the left, what John so astutely noticed is he saw a client that actually had red letters down here in this box. I don't know if I have any on here. Let's look. Nope. Oh, there we go. So if I go to the Adams family here, I can actually see something in red, and it's telling me that their credit card's expired. I need to stop work. So John's asking, well, how did that get there? That's a little bit of a kind of a hidden Easter egg. What you're going to want to do is go to any contact, and if you have a message that you want to get across in that fashion, red letters, always visible for that client when selected, all you need to do is right-click in this blue box area here, and there's an option to add a contact message. Okay, so I can go ahead and put stop work. Now, anybody who clicks on that contact will see that red letters right there, and we can relay that information accordingly. Okay, so we have somebody asking about the add-in. All you have to do, again, just to show everybody real quick, go into the Documents tab. All right, and what you're going to do is under the Documents tab, under Install, choose Microsoft Office Add-in and install it. And what that looks like, just real quick, what I'll do is I'll pull up Excel. and I'll show you. So, and this works with, again, all the Microsoft Office products. Ignore all this stuff. I'll just open up a workbook. So now that I'm in Excel, I can start doing my thing. And when I want to add this to Office Tools, there's an add-in button here at the top. And I can see import right here, and that'll bring it into Office Tools. I can also create a time card and run a timer within those Microsoft Office products also. Okay, so someone asked about the setup for the drop folder again. Okay, I know I went through that very, very quick, so I'm glad somebody asked so we can go over it again. There's two things that you got to do. First thing is create or locate a folder that you want to use as this. It's very important though that you keep in mind you don't want this to be a folder that's being used. What I mean by that is it should always be empty. All right, because anytime you add a document to this folder, Office Tools is going to try to import it and remove it from that folder. So either create a new folder or have a folder that is, empty. Once you've done that, go to Setup in Office Tools, Documents, and then Drop Folder. From here, it's going to give you a menu where you then use the ellipsis button to navigate and locate that folder and say OK. And at that point, you're done. You may want to restart Office Tools for the connection to, to make sure it's connected correctly. But really, other than that, you're all set. Any document that you add into Office Tools will then be queued, and Office Tools will prompt you to add it in. Okay, very, very good questions. Okay, so someone's asking here about moving from Smart Vaults. Perhaps in dumping those, so to speak, or bring those into Office Tools. So let me explain a little bit more about how Office Tools handles documents. First of all, the database that Office Tools uses is in itself encrypted. But inside of that database, all we're doing is linking to a location of a document that is stored natively where you choose. So what I mean by that is all these documents that you're seeing here in Office Tools are actually located on my server. They're on the S drive. So in theory, I can come in here, I can navigate through Windows, I can go to my S drive and go to that folder structure. So when it comes to bringing in documents from other applications, the very first step is to get the documents out of the other application into a native file format. We can't convert from one database to another because technically Office Tools isn't storing the documents in the database. We're using Windows to store and manage it, and then we're referencing those and organizing them inside of Office Tools. So step one of any document importing would be to have the documents in their native format. Once we've done that, then yes, we can point to that location and re-index those documents and have those come into Office Tools, and that process, all things considered, is very easy. The caveat and the discussion to have about that is how is Office Tools going to recognize that this PDF goes to this client? So we have to make sure that folder names are matching and that we're consistent across our folder names and naming conventions. So there's some things there, but to quickly answer the question, yes, coming from a system like Smart Vault or some of those other ones, as long as we can get the documents in their native formats and we discuss a little bit about best practices when it comes to folder names and things of that sort, then it's really not that big of a deal. Okay, so a question here. Possible to have time cards marked billable and then be automatically checked billed in the WIP billing screen? Okay, so Thomas here is asking a question about just basically billing everything at once, from what it sounds like. So there's a couple ways to do this. In one example, if I wanted to bill all of this time, let me go over to the time section here, then I really don't have to actually check anything. It's all billable time. I'm not specifying any specific time entry, so if I hit invoice now, it'll bill all that time, of which is worth almost $6,000 at this point. So to answer your question, Thomas, if I understand it correctly, is we don't need to mark it to be billable, or I'm sorry, mark it to be invoiced. We simply just hit invoice without choosing anything, and it will assume we want to bill everything. Once you start selecting individual items, then yes, you're being very specific, and it's only going to invoice those specific time entries. Alternatively, what you can also do, again, is just drag your mouse over all of the entries and do it that way. All of those are options. Okay, I think we're just about there. If you do have more questions or I didn't get to your question, I apologize again. I'll follow up right after this with some details. And I want to thank everybody so much for joining me. If you have any additional questions, what I would ask everybody to do is to navigate to abacusnext.com, and there we have a lot of information, including webinar schedules. We have user guides, knowledge bases, and you can find that information also obviously on OfficeTools.com. So if none of those are fitting the bill, you know what? I would say give us a call, send us an email. We'll be more than happy to schedule some training or answer the questions in whatever way works best for you. So again, thank you everybody so much for joining me today. And Kaylee, thank you so much for hosting and helping us out.
Thank you so much, Philip. What a great edition of Free Training Friday. Have a good weekend, everybody, and see you next time.